there. Welcome to another episode of The Courageous Entrepreneur. I'm your host, Winnie Anderson. This is the show that provides information, tips, and strategies to help you overcome the obstacles that life may throw in your way so that you can create the thriving, successful business that you dream of. And today's episode is brought to you by Duncan Moss, who is the creative director of Moss Media Solutions at mossmediasolutions.com. Duncan is the author of the best-selling book, Brand Power Builder. The book is full of great tools, tips, and strategies to help you win brand independence, defeat website hijackers, and rescue internet orphans. You can find the book at his website at mossmediasolutions.com. You know, we seem to have no problem talking about physical health issues. Somebody says, hey, how you doing today? And you say, oh, my back hurts. Or, I'm a little nervous. I've got surgery next week and I'm feeling a little bit, scared about that. But when you have an emotional issue or a mental health issue that you struggle with, it can be very difficult to admit to yourself and admit to others and then move forward to manage your business and your life. So when I saw my friend and colleague, Shanna Landau, come clean on Facebook about her struggle with depression, frankly, I was blown away by that. I was really touched and moved by her courage, because if that's not courageous, I don't know what is. So I wanted to make sure that she came on the show to talk about it. I've wrestled with depression my entire life, and I thought instantly when I saw her message that, oh my God, I'm not alone. So that's why I wanted to have Shanna on the show, and I was thrilled when she said yes. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce her, and I'm going to bring her on. So I am going to first bring her on. So let's see if I can do this. Yay, I did it right. Okay, tech rocks when it works. So the lovely Shanna, in addition to being a top recruiter, Shanna is also a highly sought after media authority as a career and LinkedIn expert. She has been featured all across North America on NBC, ABC, CBS, Fox, City TV, and CTV, which are in Canada. She's authored, wait for it, 6 books and is a 4-time #1 best-selling author. She works with authors to launch their books as #1 bestsellers on Amazon. So entrepreneurs, organizations, and people interested in career advancement hire Shanna to create compelling LinkedIn profiles that get them found for their expertise. Organizations hire Shanna as a keynote speaker at industry events to share how to create a personal brand in your business using social media and LinkedIn. So welcome, Shanna. I'm so glad you're here.
Winnie, thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Yeah, just thrilled to be able to cover this topic with you today, and you certainly are the picture of courage. So I want to jump right in here. What led you to make that confession?
It's interesting because it's not the first time that I've mentioned having depression, but it's the first time that I really went out on Facebook and said I deal with depression. And what prompted me was in Canada, there's a telecommunications company called Bell Canada, and they have support for mental health where they have a day called Let's Talk, and it's where they're encouraging people to talk about their mental health issues. And so a bunch of people were posting on my Facebook sort of feed, and I said, you know what, I'm going to share that I have depression too. And I got a humongous response from people who just didn't know what I was dealing with. And it's not that I kept it secret per se. Now, I didn't go out advertising it to my clients, but my family knew, all of my friends knew. I co-authored a book with Jack Canfield 2 years ago, and my chapter in the book, I wrote about my experience with depression. But for whatever reason, saying it on Facebook, all of a sudden, so many people came back and they said, I'm dealing with this too.
Yeah. And I think that really is the most powerful part of finding the courage to admit that, we have a struggle, whatever that struggle is, especially when what you struggle with or wrestle with is invisible to other people.
And I think when I posted it, I think I put a picture of me smiling and saying, this is what I look like when I'm depressed. Because, like you said, it would be invisible to other people because either I just wouldn't be public when I was dealing with it, or I would put on my best game face.
Right, which is what we do, and sometimes that works. I mean, we all know the power of smiling. Works with the brain to reduce those feelings of sadness, to get you to actually kind of create what you want. But I don't want to minimize this either. So let's talk a little bit about how long you've been dealing with this. Can you kind of give us a picture? It's been lifelong, would you say?
It hasn't actually.
Okay.
So I am probably the last person on earth that I ever thought would deal with depression. Now that was my point of view. Now, if I look at it from a family point of view, my mother has dealt with depression, other family members have dealt with depression. So I actually statistically have a really high marker for somebody who would deal with depression. But as far as I was concerned, that was something that I was just never going to have to deal with. And at the time, I was leading transformational seminars for an organization called Landmark Education. So I was really out sharing about living the life you want, how you are responsible, for your actions, and your thoughts are just thoughts. But what started to happen was my thoughts kept getting progressively more and more and more and more negative. So it didn't matter how much I spun a positive context on it, it just got darker and darker and darker. So for me, it first manifested itself. I believe it actually started after the birth of my first daughter, but where I realized that I really was dealing with depression was after the birth of my second daughter, when I finally said, all right, something is wrong here. And I think I had full out postpartum depression.
Okay. So did you try the usual, I need to, like you were saying, I need to stop thinking about this, I'll think happy thoughts, and that was no longer working effectively? I mean, it's not like you don't know how to do this if you're teaching at Landmark, right? As you say, that's what you're teaching other people.
Yeah, and I was as highly trained as you could imagine in terms of creating positive context and being responsible for my life. But I started having thoughts that were just so random. Like I kept having thoughts like, you'd be better off dead. And then with my daughter, who was a baby at the time, I would stand at the top of the staircase and all I could think of was dropping her. And of course, I'd never dropped her. That's not what I wanted, but I literally had that urge. And this will sound a little bit graphic, and I want you to remember I'm a mother who loves my children deeply, but I would walk through door frames, and my mental impetus was to bash her head against the door frame. And then I started saying to people, I feel black all the time. I feel dark all the time. And the response was, people said, no, you don't. And so I had to really fight against my community. They said, listen, you are, that's just a thought. That's not who you are. You can create any context. And then finally I had to say, wait a minute, this is a problem. So by the time I got to my doctor and sat down and talked to her, she just stopped and she looked at me and she said, you have a major, severe depression. And when she said that, the experience was one for me of relief, because I was wrestling with having these thoughts and conversations, and I'm a rational person, so having these impulses for me just didn't make sense. And so when she said I had depression, and she explained that essentially what was happening was there was not enough of a chemical called serotonin in my brain to keep that happy feeling, I really looked at it like, and it was interesting, Winnie, I was very conscious of the language that I chose. So, taking all of my training from Landmark and personal transformation training, I didn't say I am depressed, like that would define me. I said I have depression,
Mhm.
and it's temporary.
Right.
And I also, at the time when I shared with people, I said, listen, if this has happened to me, there must be some way I can use it as a contribution. So even then, when I was first diagnosed, I knew that along the journey, it would somehow make a difference for other people.
Yeah, that's great. And I know that people mean the best when they say things like, oh, you're not depressed, or, oh, you can't be depressed, or, oh, but you have so much going for you. I know they're trying, that they think that's going to trigger you to suddenly feel better. Well, why didn't I realize I have so much to be happy for? But in actuality, that's not helping. It's almost like, for me, it almost devalues my feelings and what's going on in that moment for me. Do you feel that way sometimes?
I think it takes courage for somebody who has depression to admit it to somebody else.
Yes.
And I would like to think that when people are genuinely trying to communicate something, as opposed to just saying, I feel depressed today, like I feel sad or I feel blah.
Right.
But when somebody's saying, listen, I think I'm dealing with depression, that is an SOS, a cry for help, a flag raised saying, I need something here. So I didn't take it like it devalued me, but I really understood that they did not understand what I was going through. Like, they didn't have a personal point of reference. And quite honestly, while I could have compassion before for people who had depression, until I went through it myself, I had no idea what a hell it was. And it really was a hell.
It is. Yeah. I would agree with you. It really is. So then let's talk about how this has impacted you professionally. And I know what a determined and successful person you are. How did it manifest itself through work? Did you find that it was also impacting you? I mean, obviously you got treatment, and thank God, you never followed through on an impulse to harm yourself or your daughter or your other daughter. So, and this is not, I just want to say, we're not giving medical advice. We're talking about Shanna's experience and my experience. And if this is resonating with you and you feel you have depression, get help. There are so many people out there who can help you. Okay, so back to, how did this then manifest itself in your work life and professional life, and did it impact your business in some way?
Sure. Well, I would absolutely say yes, it did impact my business, and I was still able to be successful through it. So I'll go back to the very beginning. When I first was diagnosed with depression, I had sort of the options that people weigh of, do I go with something natural, or do I, go on medication? And at the time, what I decided was that in the world of CNS, or central nervous system drugs, there's been so much research. And my doctor said to me, she said, there is literally no reason for you to suffer. So while my first inclination was to go with something natural, as a mother, I wanted to make sure that I did everything I possibly could to make sure that my children were safe, that I was there for them as a mother, and that my depression impacted my children as little as possible. So I decided to go on medication. And it took a while to find the right medication for me. And there have been times where the medication that I was on, or the antidepressant that I was on, just stopped working. And so at the beginning, what I found was the medications that I were on made me a little foggy. And I remember being in a meeting with a client, and I work in executive search, and I told her all about a particular candidate. And then she told me about a bad experience that she had with that candidate. And then literally one day later, I pitched the same candidate to her. I must have sounded like I wasn't listening to her, and so at the time I sat back and I said, what do I do? And so I said, I reached out to her and I said, I wanted to apologize for mentioning this candidate a second time. And here's truthfully what I'm dealing with. I said, I have a medical condition that's temporary. I didn't say what it was at the time. And I said, my doctor put me on a new medication and it just made me a little brain foggy. And so I apologize. It wasn't that I wasn't listening to you. I was just dealing with something else. And she said, hey, that's me on a normal day. She had complete compassion and we both laughed it off. The other thing I had to do, Winnie, was I really had to make hay while the sun shines. You know, there were times where I just recognized that I was so depressed that it just was like lifting weights, you know, heavy weights to do anything. So I would just say, okay, I'm going to do important money generating work when I'm feeling better. And when I'm feeling lousy, I'll do the kind of work where I don't have to be in communication with people. And I'd have to make that judgment. But the other thing that I would say, depression isn't just it doesn't just impact you, it impacts all sorts of things. So while I was dealing with depression, at the same time, my marriage was deteriorating. And my ex-husband had just an explosive temper. So he would get angry and that would trigger my depression. And it was just like this vicious circle. So it wasn't just dealing with depression, it was dealing with what eventually became the end of my marriage and the mess that happens, in all of that. And I remember there being times where I was so stressed out where I'd think, I can't even answer email properly. Like where, if you can imagine you have 0 to 100 and 100's where you're just in the zone and doing great. There were many months where I felt like I was at 5 or 10%. But what I did was I kept taking enough actions consistently. So, you never really found me. A lot of people when they have depression will end up in their beds, unable to get out of bed. I just didn't go that route. That wasn't my expression for me. Because I realized that I had a family to provide for and I was able to, was probably a better way to say it. I was able to get out of bed. But it was a struggle. But I guess it's one of those things where, particularly when you're dealing with creating a brand, if you take enough actions over time, people don't necessarily, they see the bigger picture. They don't necessarily see those small moments in between.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think it's something that we all need to stay focused on, that it's these little, you don't have to take a giant leap. I can hear myself. Shanna, I don't know if the volume on your machine. Can you? Okay, so maybe it's me. So anyway, I think that point is that just taking those little small steps, you don't need to make the big leap, just keep focused on doing something to move yourself forward. And everyone's experience really is very different with this, and what works for some people doesn't work for others, and that only makes it more frustrating, I think, too. So I think you've given great information about just what you've gone through and can help people then recognize, is this my experience? Is it now debilitating? Do I need help? Because I took medication too. My depression, it's been a lifelong struggle for as long as I can possibly remember. I was suicidal around 8 or 9 years old, and for the first time. And when I was in my accident in 1999, that was such a tremendous upheaval, and I had so many other issues along with my brain injury. I needed medication. I didn't take it long, but I took it, and it helped me stay focused, and it helped me feel better, so I could then take those little actions that helped me continue to move forward, which then fed itself into a positive self-efficacy as I felt better and I continued to move forward. So, if you're listening to this and it's not resonating with you, but you have depression, know that that's okay too, that you want to, reach out to somebody, a healthcare professional, someone who can help guide you through the process. So how about, go ahead.
Yeah, I do want to say too, that as I went through my journey, I also started to do some things that are in the realm of natural. So I modified my diet significantly. So I reduced gluten, wheat, sugar, dairy, and that made a big difference for me. I also went and saw an acupuncturist, and that helped as well. And I would do things like go to the gym. And I go to the gym just because it puts those positive endorphins, and it's less for me about, how do I want my body to look, and more about making sure that I feel good. And but probably the thing that I've done that has worked the most for me is when I put that post on Facebook, one of my friends and connections, Sherry and Shara, is a quantum path. And so, she had said to me, depression is something that people who suffer from depression, it could be from an event that's happened in your life and has sort of gotten programmed into you. But she said it could also even happen when you're in the womb. And a lot of people suffer from depression, and the source of that depression is outside of them, but has somehow gotten connected into how their brain is wired. And so she literally does the work of deconnecting those connections. And I've worked with her for the last 6 weeks, and it has been unbelievably, and immediately making a difference. So,
wow, that's spectacular. That's really awesome. And so that's just another example of how each of us can experience this differently. Each of us, it comes from a different place, but there's help out there. Sometimes you can do it yourself. Sometimes you do need help, and sometimes you need medicine to help you. But the point is, you're not alone, and help is out there, and help's available, and you don't need to continue to struggle, wrestle, suffer, however you want to whatever word you want to use to define this. So can you talk then just a little bit about, and you've touched on this to a degree, how you've managed to build this successful business, and actually then you've added new offerings onto your business as you've continued to grow. Is it just the little steps, or are there other things that you've been doing as well that have helped you?
Boy, it's little steps, but in terms of building other businesses, I think the best advice that I could say to people is surround yourself with other successful entrepreneurs who are doing things that you want to do. So there's different mastermind communities that I've been a part of. Sometimes there's programs that I've purchased and then, gone down that path. But in going through this journey with depression, it's also, for me, made me aware that life is fleeting. I always thought my mental health would be phenomenal. So to deal with having an experience where it wasn't or hasn't been, really has shone the light on, do things that you're passionate about, do things that you love, do things that give you joy. So I've been following my intuition. The other thing, though, that it really highlighted for me was that my business in executive search was 100% dependent on me. So very much like a real estate agent. You go and you sell a house, you get a commission. In executive search, you go and you close a search, you get a commission. And what that didn't allow for was a breakdown in my health. So I became very aware of how important it was to have different forms of income and residual income, so that if something happened in my personal life or something happened to my health, that there would be a machine that was going and still earning money without me. So some of the directions that I've gone into, and certainly the direction of creating a platform as a brand, which I did, I started that while I was dealing with my depression. I didn't have a personal brand platform before that. Really came with the realization of I am my brand. And so I had to find ways to get on TV, find ways to get published, find ways to become a thought leader and get my voice out there so that inevitably the courses that I create, the books that I launch are all associated with the success that I've had as a branding platform.
Right. That's a great bit of advice as well. I think that multiple streams of income is something that all of us need to look at so that we are creating a true business that's not solely dependent on our activity. That's fantastic. And it's, can be trite but true. Yeah, life is fleeting. It's short. It is, and it's precious, right? So and I think that also that what you may perceive as a struggle, a challenge, an obstacle, if it's there for a reason. So if we can learn from it, then that becomes the positive, flip side of that negative that we may be facing. And I think there's always a way to find a learning opportunity in every what seems to be negative.
Right.
So, Shannon, thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Sure. One of the things that I would pass on to people, and this is based on my experience, but people would say, that I confided in that I was depressed, they would say, oh, do you want to talk? Well, when I was in those moments of my deepest, darkest depression, that was the last thing that I wanted to do. Like really what I wanted to do was to completely go inside, not talk, curl up under a blanket, and just have no contact with people. But what made the biggest difference for me was saying, I need your help. I don't, the people to talk to for me weren't family members or friends. It was professional people who wouldn't get stuck with my baggage about my depression. And I did go and speak with a therapist, and that was helpful. But what I really needed from my family and friends was like, take the kids for 3 hours, or help me make some meals, like just to take the workload off so that I could still feel like my kids were taken care of. And I remember there was one time in particular where my ex-husband had an explosive anger moment, and I was not dealing well with my depression, and I ended up on the fetal position in my bed, and I made 2 calls to both my best girlfriends. One, I said, you need to take please take them. She was like, they're in 5 minutes. And then to my next girlfriend, I said, I just need you to sit with me. And both of them instantly came over. And there was nothing for them to say. There was nothing for them to do other than to help me in those ways.
Yeah. Those are great examples of how often it is that support that we need to be able to get something done or manage something and take that weight of responsibility off of us for this time period so we can work through whatever we're working through. So yeah, it's not always talk. And even in the recovery process, not everyone responds to talk therapy, and talk therapy isn't always what's right for you. So that's part of, I think, why talking to some professional to help you sort through what's going on and what kind of intervention is going to be best for you is important. But even having the courage to be able to pick up that phone and say to someone, I need help, that in itself is often an enormous leap to make, because, we're so bent on showing we're tough babes. We can do this. But sometimes we're not.
Yeah. Another thing that I did too that was helpful was, other than my business, when I realized I was dealing with depression, I got myself uncommitted from everything else that wasn't specifically making sure my children or my health or my business were taken care of. So I stopped being a seminar leader at Landmark Education, which was appropriate because I was dealing with depression. So that made sense, right? And they were amazing with me about that experience. And but I really looked at any other commitment that I had that was not integral to my business or my family, anything that was extra, that didn't have to be done. I just gave myself the freedom to, not do that. And then when I mentioned I had postpartum depression, well, I went from being like a size 5'6", to being like 210 pounds when I was pregnant. And because all of this cortisol was going through my body, I still haven't lost all of the weight. And then I finally just, and I really looked at, I was afraid at one point of putting myself on TV because my body didn't look the way I wanted my body to look. And then I finally just went, I guess it can't be about my body. It's got to be about some message other than that. But these are all parts of the journey.
They are, and they can also then contribute to this, this cycle of getting trapped in, I can't pull out because everything I'm doing seems to make me feel worse and contribute to the negativity rather than the positivity. So yeah, it can be, which is why sometimes you need help. You need help from other people because it can be so easy to feel trapped. It really can. And if you have other issues, they get twisted up in there too.
Yeah, and because I'm somebody that people looked at me and said, she's so together, she's so with it, she's so organized, she's so accountable. And I really had to sit my family down one day and I just went, I am not dealing with things well. I need help. I need your help. I need your involvement. And they just said, we didn't know. And meanwhile, I thought it was obvious to the world, but it wasn't.
Right. Yeah. So, I have nothing to say that could possibly add to that. You've done such a tremendous job, both professionally and today, in sharing this great story. I know this is important information for a lot of people, and I hope as many people as possible watch and share this episode. So to take the stigma away from being able to say, I need help, and it's this issue. It's not that I have a broken arm or a broken foot. I have this internal problem, and I need help right now.
Well, it's interesting.
So,
you look at the statistics, Winnie, 1 out of every 5 people at some point in their life is going to deal with a mental health issue. So it could be depression, it could be anxiety, it could be an eating disorder, it could be schizophrenia, but people don't plan to end up this way, but 1 out of every 5. So when you look at it like that, if you go into a networking room, 20% of people are dealing with depression, or have dealt with depression. And so I really am committed to creating an environment where somebody has depression. It is no different than having a broken arm. It's like, oh, if somebody had a broken arm, you'd say, how can I help you? If someone has depression, how can I help you? What burden can I take away from you? Just like you'd say, can I carry that for you if you had a broken arm?
Yeah, and I think that point is really great. How can I help you? Too often, I think that we, the person who wants to provide the help, wants to provide the help that we want to provide. But it's not about you. My husband is famous for this. He's an incredibly helpful person, and whenever I need help, he wants to give it to me no matter where I am on my own journey. But he's right there, from taking out the trash and doing the dishes to anything else that I need help with. But there are times when he wants to do the help that he thinks needs to be done, and that's not really what's most helpful to me in that moment. Sometimes not talking to me is really what would be helpful, but that's not going to be it. So I think that that's an important thing for us all to remember, that whenever we're looking to help anyone, that we make it what would truly be helpful to them, not what would make us feel like, oh, I helped that person today. And then that we, the person who needs the help, gets better at stating specifically what we need in that moment.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
Yeah. Really fantastic. Thank you so very much for taking the time to be with me today, and for being, so completely honest and straight up about this incredibly big, powerful issue. I know that it made a difference for a lot of people.
Good. I'm glad that it made a difference. I believe it will too.
Yeah. Awesome. So we are going to close out right now. Hopefully I'm managing this technology right. So I hope that information was powerful for you as it was powerful for me listening to Shanna. Thanks for joining me, with this episode. Please, if you thought it was helpful, share it with your contacts. As Shanna said, there's somebody in your contacts who has experienced this or is experiencing depression, and you could make a powerful impact on them by sharing this episode with them. If you're watching the replay on Facebook and you have a comment or a question, please feel free to post that below, and make sure you tag Shanna and I, and we'll get back to you. We'll respond to you as quickly as we can. This has been the Courageous Entrepreneur Show. This particular episode was brought to you by Moss Media Solutions and its creative director, Duncan Moss. And he has a book out called Brand Power Builder. The book is full of great tools, tips, and strategies to help you win brand independence, defeat website hijackers, and rescue internet orphans. So you can find the book at mossmedia.com. So thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you in another episode of The Courageous Entrepreneur very soon. Bye for now.